The principle of giving God our first and best, the first fruits, which includes but is not limited to tithing, is taught in both the Old and New Testament. Tithing is the systematic application of the principle of first fruits to daily life. The tithe represents 10% of the income or additional resources that God provides for us from day to day. In biblical times, it could apply to financial resources, agricultural products, or other sources of value produce in what was often an economy based on exchange or barter rather than cash. God deserves the first and the best of what He has given us to recognize His provisions of all good things in our lives and the capacity to produce them. The scriptures warn against giving God our leftovers or second rate while holding on to the best for ourselves. Such attitudes are described as contempt for God and His service. Instead, the Lord Jesus teaches us in Matthew 6 that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We recognize that not all churches teach this principle, and that some would reject it as a holdover from the Old Testament law. We also recognize that many people, even if convinced that the scriptures teach giving at least the title of our income, don't have the flexibility to do that right away, even if they would like to do so. The Lord calls us to share what He has given us, not what He hasn't yet given us. And He wants us to do so with gratitude, not grudgingly. The principle of tithing is found in both the Old and the New Testaments. We see Abram praying the tithe to Melchizedek in Genesis 14, before the giving of the Mosaic Law. The principle of tithing precedes the law. Proverbs 3 uses the principle of tithing, of first fruits, as an expression of trusting and honoring God as our provider. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. The Lord Jesus also teaches the tithe in Matthew 23:23 and Luke 11:42, while emphasizing the greater virtues of justice, mercy, faithfulness, and the love of God, all of which should inform our giving. The prophet Malachi warns against giving God our second best, our leftovers, as the equivalent of cheating God and even despising Him in our offerings. While he is speaking explicitly to Israel's priests in the century after their return from exile in Babylon, the Apostle Peter calls all believers a royal priesthood, called to proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of the darkness into His marvelous light. The principle of first fruits illustrates God's deliverance of His people from slavery, first of His people from Egypt, and then of His New Testament people from the sin and death, just as the Lord has given us His first and best in Jesus Christ to deliver us from bondage, so He calls us to respond to His goodness by giving our first and best of ourselves and His gifts to us. For some, God has already made the principle of first fruits and tithing a part of our lives in response to His faithfulness. For others, it may be a step-by-step process as He enables and provides for us. Either way, it is a commitment in which we can show our love for God and our recognition and expectation of His continuing faithfulness to us.